Let's talk about Lordknightmon X in general. Players that know me well enough knows that I like to talk about decks that are interesting to me, but let's talk about Lord Knight in general, and let's talk about how the meta might shape up, how JP players are starting to possibly be pushing off Lordknightmon X. So without further ado, let's get in the video and talk about it. So welcome to the big bad boogeyman, Lordknightmon X itself. So if you guys don't know what this card does, it basically has collision, piercing, it de-digivolves, prevents evolution for its when digivolving effect, and then all turns as long as it has the option or Lordknightmon in the stack. This thing gains alliance and plus 3000 DP is a blanket. So as long as those conditions are met, so decks are building it with protoform, and they are also doing the shenanigans with Lordknightmon. So as long as those conditions are met, you have a bigger body threats than anything else. So keeping this in mind though, Lordknightmon X is a very powerful card. This is basically why a lot of JP players flocked to it in the first place. It had a very powerful presence, but they are starting to decline from the deck. One, because a new meta tyrant is just a lot more scarier to deal with than JP was expecting. And we'll talk about that meta tyrant and then what they kind of are starting to do to counteract it. And this is, I've been talking to a few JP players a little bit that they are getting off of it just because of this threat. Because let's be honest, the deck has 0 protections, and that 0 protections really hurts this deck. So the big threat that we would have to talk about in a minute, but taking a look right now, here's been what like the player base has been playing a little bit, you know, taking advantage of certain pieces. And you have Lordknightmon X comboed in with Lordknightmon itself, Levia X, and then this pretty much solid text of Quartz. But taking a look across the board, you can see something's a little bit interesting. So first off, you have Cerberusmon X being Cerberusmon X, letting you set up and getting you pretty much some decent value. Another option that players started doing was playing Lady Devi X to be able to produce the token, which is basically doing the same thing as the Cerberus X, being able to get a body on board, so you swing in with your alliance, cause a collision, remove something. You know, this is a very stock, boom, you know, thought process. And then players have been starting to tack in the random rookie because Cerberus X can play in the, oh, you can't play by effect. So being able to prevent your opponent to counteract with a Levia X or Leviamon with Biting Crush, super important, because this deck has 0, and I mean 0 protection skills. So if the stack and board gets cleared, this deck falls behind so quickly, because if it's a game of chicken, this is basically the old Lordknightmon strat, but with, you know, 2024 you know, decks. And yeah, Lordknightmon X is a powerhouse, but the fact of the matter is you're still dealing with threats on board that can, if you can get those fully cleared with no batting of an eye, you're gonna have a bad time. Lordknightmon X is a strong card. Anubismon is a strong card. Levia X is a strong card. So they are playing like strong cards, and like Quartzmon, they also played Zed Millennia. That's another option. There are plenty of options, because if you go Zed Millenniumon and have Lady Devi producing the token, Zed can at least get two attacks in. So just keeping this in mind when deck building, that also a big contributor of some of these decks are literally because the scrambles exist. So meta definitely does define when a card is really good, but at the moment, you know, you have to take this with thought processes that you're going to be dealing with a lot of threats. So at the end of the day, you have like Lordknightmon X being very powerful, and players started after a little bit, because of a threat in the meta, started to lean off and start switching back. And what I've been hearing is they're moving back into Levia territory. They're focusing on Leviamon because at least with Levia, and when they do a certain shenanigans, you can interrupt it and deal with the threat. So this is why they're kind of starting to move over back into Levia, because Levia just negates the deck. So that is something to keep in mind when you're thinking about the future, is once we get that deck in March, that deck will definitely be a big contributor to what happens to Lordknightmon. In English, I definitely think we're going to see it do some crazy shenanigans. People are going to complain because of dog engine and everything like that. But I mean, it's going to happen. Players are not going to be happy when they don't feel fair and justice for their deck. I mean, but again, we can't always cater to tier 3 decks against a tier 1. You can't just say my Gallantmon deck ain't doing shit. Well, don't play Gallantmon in a Lordknightmon format. I mean, yeah, it can do some shenanigans and clean stuff, but it's not going to be able to deal with board state if you don't have something to interact with it. So stuff like that is a thought process, but you know, the big threat that's making it decline is actually this deck. This deck that is known as the Ruin Mode Loop. This deck focuses on just being a menace. So constantly spamming out Taumon and then basically using your plugins to get into your Kazuamons and your Sakuyamons and end up doing all these things, then leading up to just spam Ruin Mode turn after turn after turn after turn after turn. So Lordknightmon really does struggle a little bit against Ruin Mode. Ruin Mode basically makes it so that they're not playing an extra body. That means Lordknightmon's already minus a DP, means they're not going to gain that extra value. So if you can get to Ruin Mode first, that is something you need to. But let's talk about some counters to this boy. So people don't understand that sometimes a little bit of a Pumu card like a Pumamon that says can't play by effects. If this card is on board, they're not going to be able to get that extended value because yes, Lordknightmon's going to be on board, but you know what happens? They just don't get to do anything. Then you also have like Death X, being that they do play wide enough boards as long as if it's before they can go pop, sometimes pop off, you might be able to get Death X to work, but there are times Death X is not going to do anything. So just remember that it depends on the player strat, because again, they're going to usually do one strat, but Ruin Mode is definitely the bigger contender to deal with the board, because Lordknightmon's 3000 DP, he becomes a 10k, he's not swinging. Shine Greymon Ruin Mode, on the other hand, is basically sitting there going like, your board is negged for a bit. So as long as they can spam Ruin Modes, that board, anything they're playing is not going to be on board. So that's huge because they don't have 6000 DP Digimon consistently enough. So stuff like that really doesn't matter. And then anything that says basically can't Digivolve, what is it? And then Gaze, even like Gazemon here shuts down that deck a little bit because Gaze says that the animal engine does not gain you the memory. So that is a vital piece to Lordknightmon X. If Gaze or even Pumamon both are on board, your opponent's going to have a hard time handling the board state. So like Gaze's effects, Pumu's effects are super important against the Lordknightmon X meta. So stuff like this is something you're going to guys need to start teching into your list, because against Lordknightmon X, these are great negators because the deck naturally doesn't have them in a sense. Yes, they do have Deltamon is why they started being able to play this, but Pumamon negates the Delta play. So as long as Pumamon's on board, they can only gain the memory if they're doing the Ogre and Gobbly. So if that stack is doggo, you're just basically laughed at them and Pumu just stays on board. Pumu was just basically said, you didn't gain any memory out of this. So vitally important is that, yeah, we need to think about how deck building comes down to, especially with Lordknightmon X, has no threat removal. The deck naturally does not have it. I mean, really, it doesn't. Its Deltamon is their really only pop something effect, and that's why they kind of just use this. But they use like Labramon and stuff like that to kind of do anything. But their main focus is to use Gobblemon because of that memory gain. But, you know, there's not always going to be a good time to be able to get these to pop off. So with Lordknightmon X, if you guys really need to think about how to counteract the deck, this is how you do it. There's nothing that really grinds this deck's gears is a well-timed Pumamon-esque effect or the Gazi's on board. It just basically slows it down. Yeah, Deltamon's going to answer the Gazi more often than not, but 2 Gazis on board with 1 Delta is not enough for the game. It's going to go off and they're going to gain the memory and then they just lose it. So even though you guys might have some trouble with Lordknightmon X, I don't think this deck is the end-all be-all of the game. I think the Taomon loop is going to be a problem because spamming ruin mode 15 to 18, 20 times is not going to be what you want to deal with. But let me know down in the comments, do you think Lordknightmon X is going to be the deck that you're going to hate the most to play against, or are you guys kind of just comfortable because it feels like a fair-esque deck? It just depends on the board state. So let me know down in the comments. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you next one. Peace.